Well, thank you, Sally, and thank you to the Fintry Trusts for bringing us all together and for this occasion to talk about angels. I think not enough people are talking about angels. Um, I've often done workshops where this topic came up, and I asked people to shut their eyes and to raise their hand if they've had experiences of angels. And the purpose of shutting the eyes is that it not be any kind of competition. But usually about 80% of the people in the crowd raise their hands. So people are having experiences of angels, but very few occasions to talk about them, much less to explore what all this means, especially in light of today's science. And that's really, for me, a very thrilling part of this book and the material I'll be sharing today from it, that Rupert Sheldrake, who I'm sure all you Englanders know, and many know, is a very courageous and renowned scientist of our time. And I say courageous because very few scientists have the courage to talk about angels, but Rupert not only talks, he comes up with some wild ideas, as we shall see. But, and I might add, very few theologians have the courage to talk about angels today, too. So the fact that he and I were dialoguing, and as Sally said, the first version of our book came out from HarperCollins in what was that? 1989? Just a second here, get the numbers right. No, 1996. Yeah, 1996. And the second version, which is present today, came out from Monkfish Publishers in 2014. Now, they're identical except for one thing, that we added an extra preface to the second one because we wanted to, so to speak, bring it up to date. And one of the big changes was that I met, and Rupert also met, Lorna Byrne after the first publication of the book came out. Now, I don't know if you know Lorna Byrne, B-Y-R-N-E, but you can look her up on her webpage. She's written several important books on angels, and she's been experiencing angels since she was 2 years old. Her oldest memory is looking up from her crib as a baby and seeing her parents, each with an angel. And she just presumed for years that everyone saw angels, but not everyone does. And she learned that the hard way. She's from West Ireland, and she's illiterate because she had dyslexia, and the doctors in West Ireland told her parents when she was little, they said, she's an idiot and will never learn to read or write. So in school, they didn't have her sitting there learning to read and write. They put her in a corner and she played. Well, she played with her angels while her classmates were learning to read and write. But so she did not read about angels, she experienced them. And she has a lot of stories to tell. And one story is that when she was 10 years old, the angel said to her, "Do not tell anyone about our visits to you until we tell you you can." And that was not until she was in her 60s. She was married, had children. Her family was very, very poor. But she had these regular visitations from angels. But then they said, after her husband had died even, they said, "Now you can tell the world." And by the way, the angel said, "Someday you will write a book and which will be famous." And she laughed at the angel and said, I can't even read. How could I write a book? Well, she didn't write a book. She dictated a book and then another one and so forth of her experiences with the angels. So I do recommend her very much. She's a real thing, and she has a lot to say. In fact, one of the big lessons I learned, like when I first sat down with her, I was checking her out to say, is this lady for real or not? And she is. And I knew that 20 minutes into our encounter. And I asked her, how can I help you? And she said, well, I haven't lectured much or talked much on the West Coast, where I live in California. If you could arrange a public event, but I don't lecture. I want to be interviewed. Okay, fine, I said. So we had her at Grace Cathedral in San Francisco, which holds 1,000 people, and she filled it. I think there were 1,300 people that night because she has a web page and the books were out then. But one of the points she made that night when I interviewed her is this. She said there are a lot of unemployed angels in the world today. Now, this was around 1910 or so during the financial crash. And I said, oh my, I said, I know so many people who are unemployed. Do I have to worry about putting angels to work too? Oh no, she said, I don't mean that. What I mean is that God knows how much trouble humans are in today and has poured angels on the earth to help us, and no one's asking them for help. So there are a lot of unemployed angels on the planet today. I think that's very concrete invitation to invite the angels in. She taught me a lot more too, and maybe some of that will come up. What I'm going to do in my book, as Sally alluded to, we have 3 parts to our book. The methodology in the book was to treat first Denis Areopagite, because he was a 6th century Syrian monk, and he was really the first to write elaborately on the angels. And then we treated Thomas Aquinas, who was 13th century, and he developed a very rich theology of the angels. And then Hildegard of Bingen, who was a century before Aquinas, 12th century, but we give her the final word, if you will. And but today I'll be focusing on Aquinas and Hildegard, and also, of course, the science that comes up, because this is what Rupert and I did. We did a series of talks in different places. St. James Piccadilly was one, and Vasson Island outside in Canada, and then also in the Bay Area. We did a series of talks, and then we and dialogues, and then we wrote them out for the book. Now, I'd like to begin with a few points that we make in the preface, and it's interesting that Denis Areopagite was folded into Thomas Aquinas's work, and who was very familiar with him. Aquinas also included Muslim philosophers like Averroes and so forth. And part of the point of your organization, I understand, is that you're quite interfaith. Well, I want to show here as we get started, share with you a meditation on various images of angels from various traditions. And these are found in our first book. The second book, they wanted to save money, so they didn't reproduce the pictures. But let's show that slideshow now that we have, Dennis, of the angels. Now it begins with 2 guys who aren't angels, myself and Rupert. But I think it's fair. There you are. That was taken in Rupert's backyard, and outside London. But that's when we were working on this book, I think. We were both a little younger back then. Okay, now we're going to see angels from various traditions, and that's the thing about angels. All religious traditions talk about angels. Now, the indigenous people call angels spirits. So I worked a lot with the Lakota people in North America, and Buck Ghosthorse is one of my friends and teachers, and he said to me one day, what you Christians call angels, we call spirits. Okay, this is a picture of a painting by Harriet Powers of an African-American quilt. But even in this quilt art, this folk art in quilts, the angels show up, as you can see. Okay, next, please. Okay, here's an angel from the UK, on a roof beam in the Church of St. Mary Magdalene, Newark-on-Trent, Nottinghamshire, around 1470. The angel is holding the coat of arms of the Diocese of Southwell. So this kind of brings it home to you who are engaging from England. Next, please. This is very interesting. In fact, this photograph is on the cover of our first version of the book. And this is an untouched, not retouched photograph of a cloud that we made the cover of the book, but taken by someone named Robert Monroe. But it is an interesting image for sure, especially considering that it's untouched and it's of a cloud. Thank you. Next picture, please. And this is a Japanese artist and Mugaku dancers, but they have wings. Angels, of course, are often depicted with wings, although Hildegard says they do not have wings, but we picture it that way because they do fly, and they fly very fast, according to Hildegard. And but that's how humans do it. We put wings on them because that's how we identify flying with birds. Next, please. And this is from a Turkish miniature in a book, but this is, of course, Muslim images of angels. And the Muslim tradition has a long tradition on angels, including the fact that an angel dictated the Quran to Muhammad. Next, please. This is well-known Leonardo da Vinci's picture of the angel at the Annunciation. And of course, it's in color in the original, but it's very striking. And those wings are really something else. They look like airplane wings, 500 years before airplanes. Next, please. Yes, Arachno Kent, a painting of 1918. I think this is a very interesting expression of angels on flight. And notice how big the angel is in proportion to the ship, for example. So I'll be getting a feeling for the variety of cultures and religions and variety of imagination when it comes to attempting to picture angels, to tell the story of angels. Next, please. This one I really love. This is a Flight of the Shaman. And so the indigenous peoples very much, as I said, incorporate spirit and spirits into their ceremonies. And I've certainly experienced them at sun dances and sweat lodges and so forth that I've attended. But this is a marvelous picture where the angel is incorporating the spirits of the birds and animals as well. Flight of the shaman. And so that shamans actually fly. Now these go back to more ancient times. Down in the bottom left-hand corner, you have an Egyptian painting. And the Egyptians, like many others, believe that angels play a role in death, that they take the soul to the next place. And so that's what that's about. So that's an ancient Egyptian painting. And then William Blake is on the right-hand top there, his painting of the angels. Okay, next, please. This is a Greek picture of angels, sleep and death, carrying a dead warrior from the battlefield of Troy. 5th century BC. So here again, in that tradition too, the angels have an important role to play when we die. And on the right, an angel from the cemetery of Belfast, Maine, late 1800s. Okay, that's the last one. But I just wanted to give you this brief meditation as we get going, so you get a feel for how intercultural and interfaith angelology is. That the biblical tradition is not the only tradition that has something to say about angels. Now, one of the points that Rupert Sheldrake emphasized in our dialogues is the following. He says, we pray, Our Father who art in heaven. Nowadays, I suppose, many Christians assume that this is merely a metaphorical statement, nothing to do with the actual sky. The heavens have been handed over to science. The celestial realm is a domain of astronomy. And astronomy has nothing to do with God or spirits or angels. It is concerned with galaxies, the geometry of the gravitational field, the emission spectra of hydrogen atoms, the life cycles of stars, quasars, black holes, and so forth. But this isn't how people used to think. People used to think that the heavens were full of spirits and of God. And indeed, if you think of God as omnipresent everywhere, divinity must be present throughout the whole universe, of which the earth is but an infinitesimal part. And so he talks about how the 17th century and 18th century mechanized the universe and shut down all mention of spirit. And that carried through up until the early 20th century with Newtonian laws and with the notion that the universe is a machine. There's no room for angels in a machine. But as he said, this mechanistic worldview is now being superseded by science itself. Recent scientific insights are leading us toward a new vision of a living world. And he writes about this in his book called Science Set Free, or The Science Delusion. And he cites the scientist Sir Karl Popper, quote, through modern physics, materialism has transcended itself, unquote. Through modern physics, materialism has transcended itself. So we are moving beyond materialism, and certainly we're not seeing the universe as a machine anymore. That the nearest model for the universe is an organism. It began smaller than a zygote and has grown to be 2 trillion galaxies, each with hundreds of billions of stars. So the nearest analogy we have for the universe is the opposite of a machine. It is an organism. Now, he talks about Alfred Russel Wallace. Alfred Russel Wallace was a scientist who worked with Charles Darwin on evolutionary theory, and they were very close. They did a lot of work together, and together they delivered back-to-back speeches at the scientific conference in London, I think it was, laying out evolutionary theory for the first time publicly. But he tells a story, Rupert does, about how they eventually had a divorce. They broke up. And the fight was over angels. Wallace insisted that evolution of Earth is too short a time to have developed without intellectual guidance. For example, the invention of the eye and so forth. But Darwin stuck to the idea that it was all by chance. So they split. And the split was over angels because Wallace said in his very last book, called The World of Life, a manifestation of creative power, directive mind, and ultimate purpose, Wallace said that we needed guided intelligence for evolution to occurs that has occurred. And the name for that in the West is angels. So the split was over angels, and it's so interesting. Everyone's heard of Darwin. Who's heard of Wallace? Well, Wallace was from the lower classes, unlike Darwin. Darwin knew how to work the press and the media. And I'm not even sure that Wallace wanted to work the press and media. He may have been a more pure scientist and less interested in fame. But whatever the case, we all know Darwin, and few of us have heard of Wallace. But I think it's very significant that Rupert brings this historical scientific fact into the picture, that there was a big fight early in the 20th century, or late 19th century, about evolution with guidance or without guidance. And of course, Rupert's whole thesis is that evolution has brought a whole new excitement to the topic of angels. And to remember that angels are the governing beings in the universe. That's how Thomas Aquinas puts it, that they govern the universe. They and these intelligences. And that's really what many traditions have said over the centuries, that there are these invisible intelligent beings that are steering things. Now, in the West, we've trivialized the angels. The Baroque period reduced angels to little babies with bare bums, and that doesn't correspond to anyone's experience of angels. Every time an angel appears in the scriptures, the first word is, don't be afraid. Well, would you be afraid if a little bare-bottom baby appeared and called itself an angel? You'd only be afraid that it might poopy on you. It doesn't have a diaper. Get the diaper. But that's not what we've been told here. Angels have great intelligence. And Aquinas says not only great intelligence, but he says they cannot help but love. They are great lovers. And they love and care for our species and others. And they steer us in the whole unfolding of evolution, as Rupert sees it. So now let's turn to Thomas Aquinas. He lived 1225 to 1274, so 3/4 of the 13th century. And here's one thing he says: the entire corporeal world is governed by God through the angels. Through the angels. See, that the angels are seeing over the evolution of the universe. The angels are part of the universe, he says, in the sense that they do not constitute a universe on their own, but are combined with the physical co-creation to form one total world. The relationship of creature to creature. For the total good of the universe consists of the interrelationship of things, and no part is complete and perfect in isolation from the whole. Now that's just interesting in itself. That word interrelationship of things is holding the universe together. Well, that's today's postmodern physics. The word interconnection, interrelationship is an absolute law, if you will, of today's postmodern physics. Rupert prefers the word habit to law. He thinks that we shouldn't talk about laws of nature, but habits, because the laws of nature themselves have evolved. And you don't get that impression. Most people think laws are something frozen, but there's nothing frozen in nature. Even the habits of nature are important, but they evolve. Now, one point that Aquinas teaches is about intuition. He says that angels are intellectual beings who understand, but they learn by intuition. They don't write books or read books. They don't go to school. They get it all from intuition. They are masters at intuition. And what that means to me is that when we get into our intuitive brains, and Einstein says we've been given two gifts, the rational brain and the intuitive brain. And it's from the intuitive brain that we get values, says Einstein, not from the rational brain. The rational brain gives us method, but not values. But Einstein criticizes Western education. He says, I abhor American education because it's all about the rational brain. It leaves out the intuitive brain, which is to say it leaves out values. Well, when you get into your intuitive brain, or what I like to call the mystical brain, that is when you encounter angels. And we have this language called muse, from which we get the word music and museum and many other words. So when you're being true to your creativity, your intuition, I say that you will encounter angels on the highway, hitchhiking, the highway of intuition. And I think that's one reason why so many artists in the West have drawn pictures of angels. I think they feel very close to angels. They encounter angels when they paint or when they make music, etc. Because angels are bearers of intuition, if you will, triggers of intuition. Another word is light. And angels are light beings. Hildegard talks about angels as spheres of light, which is stunning because Lorna Byrne says her experience of angels is spheres of light. She didn't read that in Hildegard because she doesn't read. That was her experience. So here, a 12th century nun and genius, Hildegard, and among other things, a musical genius. She encounters music, angels in her music. She encountered angels as balls of light, spheres of light, and so did this 20th century peasant woman from Ireland, West Ireland, Lorna Byrne. Again, no wings. Now, here is what most blew the mind of Rupert Sheldrake in our Dialogues on Angels. That was reading Aquinas, and Rupert ended up saying, if you substitute the word quanta for angels, in Aquinas' discussion of angels, you have today's postmodern physics. What Aquinas calls angels, today's physics calls quanta, because they're asking the same questions about the speed of light and so forth. Here's what he says. When Aquinas discusses how angels move from place to place, his reasoning has extraordinary parallels to both quantum and relativity theories. Angels are quantized. You get a whole angel or none at all. They move as units of action. The only way you can detect their presence is through action. They are quanta of action. And although when they act in one place and then in another, from our point of view, time elapses while they are moving. From the point of view of the angel, this movement is instantaneous and no time elapses. This is just like Einstein's description of the movement of a photon of light. Although we as external observers can measure the speed of light, from the point of view of the light itself, no time elapses as it travels. It doesn't get older. We still have light from around 14 billion years ago, from soon after the Big Bang. And of course, Webb telescope is pouring that light into our living rooms and computers every day in the form of the cosmic microwave background radiation. After all that time, is still around and still going strong. So in modern physics, there are remarkable parallels to the traditional doctrine about angels. And I think the parallels arise because the same problems are being considered. How does something without mass, without body, but capable of action, move? That's today's question. Angels, according to Aquinas, have no mass, they have no body. The same as photons. They are massless, and you can detect them only by their action. And I ask him, does that mean that photons are immortal? And he says, yes, as long as they're moving at the speed of light from place to place. But when they act, they are extinguished through their action. So in that sense, they come to an end. They pass on their energy as they act. This, I presume, makes them different from angels. So that's one of the most astounding, well, it's the most astounding discovery, I think, about angels in the 20th century, coming from Rupert Sheldrake. Substitute the word quanta, and then read Aquinas' discourses on angels, and you have today's physics. It says a lot about the genius of Thomas Aquinas, for sure. And he was a freak. He was an absolute genius. He was the Einstein of his time. And so was Hildegard, a century before him. Now, so angels are champions of intuition. That's their thing. And so they saddle up to us when we are in intuitive modalities, especially when we're being creative and artists, especially encounter angels a lot. Certainly Hildegard did. And prophecy comes through angels. Aquinas says angels carry thoughts from prophet to prophet. Angels carry thoughts from prophet to prophet. I just love that. I think of bees carrying pollen from flower to flower. So once again, the prophetic imagination tunes in to the angelic world. And this is one reason why there are these many biblical stories of angels appearing at really important times in history, like the picture from Da Vinci, and there are many other pictures like it, where the Annunciation, you see, the angel Gabriel is announcing the good news to come to Mary. And that's typical. The word angel in Greek means messenger. So that is kind of a basic work that they do, especially with humans. But they're doing other things too, like governing the universe, steering evolution itself. Aquinas says the Spirit works grace in people by means of the angels. The divine enlightenments and revelations are conveyed from God to humans by the angels. Now, prophetic knowledge is bestowed by divine enlightenment and revelation. Therefore, it is evident, it is conveyed by the angels. There's prophecy between the angels and the people. So that's another work of the angels, especially with human beings. And another work is this, and this is a brilliant statement from Aquinas. Angels are announcers of divine silence. Angels are announcers of divine silence. So among other things, I think that means that as you deepen your meditation and your capacity for silence, receptivity, and deep listening, which is what contemplation is, you will encounter spirits or angels. Angels are announcers of divine silence. Of course, there's an irony in that sentence. Announce silence? Isn't that a contradiction? Well, it gets you to think, doesn't it? It's like a Buddhist koan or something, announcing silence. But it's true that silence has a profound presence when it is deep. For example, if you have an experience of awe, what happens? Handle it all. And that happened to Job. Job learned to shut up. He was always talking and complaining, but he learned to shut up when toward the end of the book of Job and all his wails and complaining and whining to God, God says, were you there when I set the foundations of the earth, and of the deep, of the ocean, and the land? Were you there when mountain goats bore birth children, and horses, and so forth? And that's when Job put his hand over his mouth and shut up. He learned to listen, you see. So awe produces silence. I always tell my students there's only two responses to a mystical experience. One is silence, and the other is art. And the art comes out of the silence. When you have been struck by something very powerfully, you want to put it to poetry or to music or to dance or to theater or to film and so forth. That's one of the languages of a mystical experience. Angels are announcers of divine silence. And he goes on and talks about it. For it is clear that a conception of the heart or the intellect that is without voice is with silence. It is through a perceptible voice that silence of the heart is proclaimed. Angels are always announcers of divine silence. So when you are experiencing deep silence in any situation, in meditation, or art is meditation, the angels are very much present. Another teaching from Aquinas, and very much developed in Hildegard too, is about our work and angels. Here's Aquinas. We do the works that are of God along with the holy angels. We do the works that are of God along with the holy angels. So angels are co-creators and co-workers with us. And this is one reason we should be calling on them, especially at this time when humanity needs a lot of work. Humanity is a piece of work today. We're destroying Mother Earth and all the rest that's going on. And especially in my country, the dark night of democracy and the dark night of Mother Earth, all twirling us around. And this is not happening just in my country. It's just louder there because we've allowed media. But it's happening around the world. And so especially when there are deep troubles and when humanity is on a bad path, the angels are there to be called upon. They are co-workers. Rupert likes to refer to the Feast of the Angels, which is on September 29th in the West, St. Michael and all the angels, and how that feast day, he thinks, should get much more attention in our time than it does. Now here he elaborates more on the whole photon and angel parallel. On page 104, he says, quantum entities such as photons are discontinuous in their action. When a photon leaves the sun, there's a quantum of action there. When it hits something on Earth and illuminates it, there's another action. But in between, the photon can only be represented by a wave function spread out through space. As soon as it acts, you can locate it. So the issues Aquinas deals with in relation to the movement of angels are similar to the ideas about the movement of photons and other quantum particles in quantum theory. A photon can be in one place at one instant, say when the light leaves the sun, but it could be another place at another instant when the light from the sun hits something on the earth and lights it up. About 8 minutes in the normal measure of time between those instants. So we can assign a speed to light. But the angels don't. So the angels deeply affect our imaginations. That's the work of intuition, isn't it? And this is one reason I think that they participate in the work of the prophetic, because the prophetic is making judgment about the right and wrongness of things. As Rabbi Hesher says, the prophet interferes. Well, to interfere, you have to have a pretty strong conviction, conscience, that this is wrong and we can do better. Now, one of the questions that Rupert keeps bringing up regarding evolution, and of course, Rupert was trained as a biologist, is, let's say that the dinosaurs had angels directing their evolution. But then angels went out of business, didn't they? They were around for millions of years, so then what happens to the angel who is guiding the evolution of dinosaurs? He said these are questions that were never asked in the Middle Ages because they didn't have evolution as a understanding of the universe. But he thinks that they get reassigned to new jobs. Or maybe he thinks there may be dinosaurs on another planet, in another galaxy someplace. Now, here is an issue that Rupert is really sticking his neck out at. But he says the sun is so complex, it is more complex than the human brain. Maybe the sun is an angel because it is so complex, it accomplishes so much, it's so powerful. He raises a question, is a star an angel? Which is, of course, an ancient question because in the old days, they did think that planets and stars were spiritual beings. Okay, now I'm going to turn to Hildegard of Bingen and her wonderful teachings on the angels. She says the original fire out of which the angels burn and live is God himself. This fire is every glory out of which the mystery of mysteries comes forth. The angels surround God in their glowing fire, for they are living light. They do not have wings like birds, but are still hovering flames in the power of God. So she actually talks about her visions. She had a lot of visions, and she painted many of them in mandalas, and she called the whole collection of her paintings Illuminations. And that was my first book on Hildegard, was called Illuminations of Hildegard, where I reproduce about 30 of her paintings. But she talks about the living light that visited her. That's what happens in her visions. A living light appears. Now here she's calling angels living light. And in her self-portrait, she has flames of fire coming over her head, just like the apostles in Pentecost. So she identifies thoroughly with the original apostles, the Pentecost event of the flames coming over their head and giving them a new courage and a new vision of life, and sending them out to spread some good news. So for her, this living light is something she experiences on a regular basis. She says that she quotes God as saying, I've created mirrors to look upon my face, to observe all the never-ending wonders of my origins. So angels are mirrors of the divine. I let a powerful light go forth in these innumerable hosts, the angels. So again, she's connecting the angels directly to the light of divinity. And remember, even in the Genesis creation story, let there be light, it was not the sun that God was talking about. The sun came later in that story. So we're talking about an earlier light than sunlight. Now, Rupert jumps on that and says, well, yeah, it could be the light of radiation, such as microwaves and X-rays and the radiation that interconnects the whole cosmos and humanity together. That might be closer to the light that Hildegard and Aquinas talked about regarding angels. She goes on, and God created light, invisible illumination, which clings to the living flying spheres, the angels. So she's calling angels living flying spheres with invisible illumination. O you angels, she says, whose being streams out from your countenance, you alone glimpse the most internal power of creation which the Father's heart breathes. You see it as in a face. See, she picks up on that image of mirror. The angels are a light, she says, on which the spheres of life will depend. Rupert says, was he saying that angels are two-way mirrors? Two-way mirrors. And here is another statement from Hildegard about the praise that angels do, cosmic praise. Quote, just as sunshine shows the sun, so also angels announce God through their praise. Just as a sun cannot exist without its light, so the Godhead is nothing without the angels' praise. The entire cosmos sang the song of the angels. The entire cosmos sings the song of the angels. And here's a beautiful poem about that from Hildegard. The angels' tongues are simply pure praise. So the fire has its flames, and it praises before God. The wind moves the flames in order to praise God. In the voice lives the word. That is also a praise of God. And a voice will be heard, and that also is pure praise for God. Therefore, the entire world is praise of God. So you can see, she's seeing the angels everywhere. And she did not know this entire world is 2 trillion galaxies, each with hundreds of billions of stars. Only our generation has those facts. That came out a few summers ago. Newton thought the universe was our Milky Way, period. One galaxy. Think how much smarter all of you are than Newton. So Hildegard has this marvelous cosmological consciousness in which she sees the angels at work and on fire. Now, here's one of the stunning things that she writes about. This really blew my mind. She says that the angels praised human work. The angels praise human work. Now, most of us have been taught to think about, we're here to praise the angels' work, maybe, if we believe in angels at all. But she flips it. You know, she's getting us over our inferiority complex to angel. Humans serve 2 purposes, she says. They sing God's praise and they practice good works. So God is recognized through their praise and through the good works one can see in their wonders that they do. And angels recognize this. They love to praise our work. Now we have to remember about angels, they don't have choices every day like we do. They don't have to sweat over what their vocation is or what school to go to or what person to apprentice with or anything like that. They get one vocation, and it's their vocation their whole life, unless their duty goes extinct like the dinosaurs and they have to move on to something else. But they don't have a lot of choices at all. We do, and they marvel at that. And let me add, if you've ever been making love and you hear wings flapping, that's angels. Angels are envious that we can make love. They don't have bodies. They don't know anything about sex and sexual love. So don't be surprised if you hear flapping wings. They're cheering you on. They're praising you. They know that lovemaking is a theophany, like the book of Songs, Song of Songs in the Bible writes about. But the theologians for centuries have been trying to clean up that book and say, oh, no, it's not about that. It's about God loving Jesus or God loving the church or Jesus loving the church. No. Ask any Jew. They wrote the book. One of the requirements for the Sabbath, celebrating the Sabbath in Judaism, is number 1, you read the Song of Songs, and number 2, you make love. That's not what Christians have been taught, because St. Augustine played a much bigger role in Christianity than has Jesus. Jesus was a Jew. So let's bring the angels back to lovemaking. Why not? It's intuitive and it's beautiful and it is about light and it's often about birthing new life. So why wouldn't angels be involved in that great work? Humans are angelic through their praise, but through their holy deeds, they are human. But as a whole, they are the full work of God, says Hildegard, in praise and in deeds. And the angels, they bring zithers and harmony and all voices of praise to praise humanity, who are praising God. So, your friend is my friend. And if angels are close to God, which they are, well, they're close to us as we get close to God. And they love to see that. She says, angels do not have wings as birds do, but fly many times as fast, at the same pace that human thoughts travel. Now that's fast. That's faster than light. And Rupert goes on about that. How we don't know how to measure human thoughts, but we know it's fast. You can get on a phone in London and talk to someone in Australia, and very little time is elapsing, and their thoughts going back and forth too, right? So that's an amazing statement from Hildegard. Don't have wings, and they're flying as fast as thoughts, which is faster than light. Here, 160. All of the angels, this is Hildegard, all of the angels are amazed at humans, all of them, who through their holy works appear clothed with an incredibly beautiful garment. For the angel without the work of the flesh is simply praise. But the humans with their corporeal works are a glorification. Therefore the angels praise humans' work. The angels lift up their voices to God in praise of the good works of humanity. They continually praise the ever-increasing good works of humankind. They climb unto the golden altar which stands before God's countenance, and they intone a new song to honor human works. So they're even composing songs about us and climbing on the altars. Now, of course, she also links angels to worship, as do other angelologists. And of course, in the Mass, and she had an experience one year, mystical experience at Mass, where angels flowed up and down the altar like a upside down waterfall. Well, I'll tell you a story. The day I interviewed Lorna Byrne, it was a Sunday at Grace Cathedral, San Francisco. That Saturday night, we had our cosmic Mass, and she attended, and the theme was the angels of that Mass. We always have a theme. And I asked her in my interview, were the angels at the Mass last night? Oh my goodness, she said, a lot more angels than people were there. And I said, what were they doing? She said they were flowing up and down. And she had the very same experience at worship that Hildegard had 800 years earlier. And she didn't read about Hildegard because she doesn't read. But she saw the angels flowing up and flowing down on the altar. So that's significant. Has our worship become so boring that angels aren't even in church anymore? That's a question I asked 25 years ago, and that's why I started the Cosmic Mass with the help of the Rave movement from Sheffield. I know where angels have gone because they're bored in church. They've gone to bookstores. Because over the years, I've had a lot of people tell me a story like this. The stranger comes up after a talk. She says, I was in depression for 3 years. I saw a therapist. It didn't work. I got a message, go to the bookstore. I went to the bookstore and I was looking at books, eye level, and this book came down from above and hit me in the head and fell on the floor. It was called Original Blessing by Matthew Fox. I'd never heard of either of you. I took it home, and that was the medicine for my depression, she said. Well, that was just one. Another person told me something similar. He was going through a great crisis and couldn't get any help. He went to a bookstore, and my big book on Meister Eckhart, this thick, with 38 of his sermons with the commentary, fell down from above and hit him in the head. And he took it home with him. I mean, it's such a big book, I could have hurt him. I might have been sued. But anyway, he took it home, and Meister Eckhart got him through his crisis. Many stories I've heard like that. This convinces me angels are in bookstores these days, folks, throwing books at you. throwing books at people, dropping them from above. Here's another insight from Hildegard about angels, and it has to do with language. She says that the first language that Adam spoke was the language of angels, that Adam understood the language of angels. He knew the language well and could understand it. But then later, when humans started developing their own languages, she thinks that the angels helped humans to develop languages. And she goes on about that, which is very interesting because, of course, many linguists are asking the basic question, when did we start languages and how and who and so forth? But she has her answer to the question. She thinks angels were involved. Now, here's an amazing statement. She says that when God's Son was born from his mother upon earth, he appeared in heaven and the Father. So the angels trembled forthwith and exultingly intoned honey-flowing songs of praise. At this, the heavenly kettle drums and zithers and all kinds of musical sounds sounded out in indescribable harmony and beauty. For humanity, which had lain in corruption, was raised into bliss. And the resurrected Son heard of heavenly choruses, "This is my beloved Son." And the angels were awoken. So it's interesting. She's connecting the incarnation with the angels. And of course, in the stories of nativity, the angels play a big role, don't they? They come and talk to the shepherds and all the rest, and even the magi. But she's saying that this too is an event in the history of angels, that they was this, they brought out the kettle drums and the zithers. Understand that Hildegard was a genius at music. She wrote the first opera, 300 years older opera than any other opera in the West, etc. Now, how great, she says, is the joy that God became human. Among the angels, God exists as divinity, but among humans, God exists as a human. And Aquinas makes that point too. He says, God did not become an angel. God became a human. And she talks about angels being present when humans die. And of course, the song that you sing in a Mass, Holy, 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 Lord God of Hosts, that is a song from the Hebrew Scriptures, but it is a song that angels are singing, a song of praise to God. So that's bringing angels in an explicit way in the language of worship. Now, before I close and we have discussion, I'm going to share with you, we end the book conclusion with a summary of these matters, but questions for the future, because we have this new evolutionary understanding that, of course, none of these thinkers about angels had. So here are some of the questions we put out there. How can we understand the consciousness of planets, stars, and galaxies? In the light of contemporary cosmology, can the traditional understanding of celestial intelligence help us interpret the self-organizing powers of planets, stars, and galaxies? Do angels have a role to play in the self-organizing dynamics of the microscopic world? In an evolutionary and expanding universe, are new species of angels coming into being as new forms and structures and fields arise? And Rupert believes strongly that new angels do come into being when new forms are happening in evolution. What role do angels play in guiding the evolutionary process? Do angels evolve? How fast can angels communicate across the vastness of the universe? Do the fallen angels bring about evil and other conscious organisms residing in other parts of the universe? Can angels guide us through social and ecological evils that surround us and threaten generations yet unborn? Can angels help to revivify our forms of worship? How can angels assist in resacralizing the work of artists? How can we, with the angels, resacralize the world? So that's a little summary of our studies of angels. Me, a theologian, and Rupert, a scientist. And I look forward to our discussion or questions if you have them.